Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Force here, going to be looking at another strategy video today. This time we're going to be looking at a Terran strategy, again starting it out in 2x speed because crap to talk about at the beginning of the matchup. So the player we're going to be focusing on is RMDX and the opponent in this matchup is Damaga. This is going to be a Terran versus Zerg strategy. Now specifically, what are we looking at today? Well, we're going to be looking at a very abusive and very gimmicky build. This is not a standard build. This is not something I would suggest doing every single game. But if you do this in maps where you're in close positions, you can be very effective with this strategy. We're going to see exactly what it is in one moment, but the basic summarization is going to be getting early double Hellions, following those up with cloaked Banshees, and then following that up with a Marine Thor push. Those are three very devastating things back to back. And the idea here is that you're going to be continuously harassing your Zerg opponent, and it's just going to be very difficult for them to deal with all these different types of harassment. Again, starting off with those light unit Hellions harassing the economy, then following that up with that techie Cloak Banshee, and then just a really heavy, beefy push with that Thor Marine. So the build order that we're going to be looking at, this is an unorthodox build, so I'm definitely going to go over the build order for it. Starting out with a 10 depot that is followed up with a 11 Refinery, 13 Barracks, 16 second Refinery, then a 16 Orbital Command. Right after that, a 16 Factory, and then putting that Reactor on the Barrack while the Factory is building, and then as soon as that's done, swapping that right out. 19 supply is going to be when that Starport comes down, and then a 23 supply getting that tech lab there on the racks, and you're going to be switching that up. And let's slow it on down right now to that normal speed, the faster. So up until this point, I've just been building those buildings. Again, what's happening is that you're putting that Reactor on the Barracks, and then as soon as the factory is done, you switch it up right there, and then going to be pushing out with these early Hellions. Now, of course, going to be very micro-intensive. So while you're moving out, you need to make sure that you focus on them. Also doing this swap, and look at this. This is happening while the push is taking place. So pushing out with those Hellions at the very same time, researching that Cloak, and getting that first Banshee. The Cloak research went down at 30 supply. That Banshee went down to 28 there. So yeah, and then pushing out right here with those Hellions, and the idea, of course, is you want to just micro away from any danger to them, and try to do as much damage as possible. The more economic damage you can do, the better off you are. Now, what's going to happen here, unfortunately for our MDX, is that he doesn't do quite enough damage. In fact, he doesn't really do much of any damage. But with that said, that kind of goes to show you just how effective this build can be. Even with doing very little damage, he is going to end up winning this game. So we're going to be looking at the effectiveness of this now. Once you do those double reactors, you're going to be switching the barrack with the factory and pumping out double Marines from that point. Going to be opening up with that first Banshee, as you can see, coming on out. Cloak is going to be just about finished at that point. Going to need about another minute or so, but it will be finished sometime shortly. In this particular map, you're going to see him starting to work on those back rocks as well. And then while you're pushing out with those first Banshee, second Banshee is going to be built as well. And while you're pushing out with those first two Banshees, you're going to be getting that Armory. Now, the Armory timing was at 30 supply. So from this point, you do the harassment with the Banshee, trying to micro away from any queens, obviously. Keep an eye out because the layer should be just about popped at that point, and then you will be seeing Overseer. But just focus on this Banshee harass, try to do as much damage as possible. As soon as that Armory is done, you're going to be getting that Thor, and again, just continue up Marine production and get ready to start to push out with the Thor. And now the Cloak Banshee, obviously very important for you, like I said, to do as much damage as possible. Queen's going to be a primary target of yours. If you can take out Queens, really inhibits the production and the ability of your Zerg opponent. Trying to pull away when you are low on health, because that secondary Banshee is going to be following up. A little bit of a mistake there on RMDX's part in cloaking so incredibly early. Not necessarily something I would suggest doing. But yeah, just moving around with these cloaked units, doing as much damage as possible. All the meanwhile, you're continuing up that Marine production. You can see here he does get supply blocked, unfortunately, so trying to come down with some additionals. There we go. Continuing up that Marine production and coming out with that first Thor. And then after that first Thor, go ahead and build your second Thor. This is just going to be a very devastating attack, if for no other reason than what I had mentioned earlier. It's just three completely different forms of harassment back to back, and it's very difficult to deal with because the response to each of those types of harassment is completely different. Obviously, the response for Cloak Banshees isn't necessarily the same response as you would get for the Hellions, and going to be pushing out with a lot of SCVs as well. So again, very gimmicky, very all-in-y build, but it can be incredibly effective. And I think the great thing on RMDX's part, I would say, in this particular matchup is that he did manage to save those Banshees, pulling out with just enough health You bring in SCVs for 2 reasons, one of which is the repairs. Going to let you repair up those Banshees and the Thors. That's going to be a really big important part of this when you're pushing out, is that being able to repair those Thors is going to almost double their, I mean, more than, I'm just throwing numbers out there, but it's going to incredibly increase the effectiveness of the unit, because it's going to be much more difficult for your opponent to take them out. So you can see also following around those Banshees, repairing those, obviously part of the effectiveness as well. And yeah, this push is just incredibly devastating when done properly. And I think the important part to realize as well is that RMDX, like I mentioned, with that first Hellion push, didn't really do that much damage. But even with that said, even without doing that much damage, it just, this push is going to be so incredibly effective. It is, yes, I would say somewhat cheesy, maybe more than somewhat. It is definitely cheesy, and very all-in-y as well. You can see not a lot of transition ability for him. He doesn't have that expansion even in consideration at this point. Now I guess I would imagine around this time he could expand, but you know, 11 minutes into the game and then throwing all this in here, if they can defend against this, they're going to be in a good spot as opposed to you. But again, it's going to be very difficult for them to defend. So really strong, really effective strategy against a Zerg player. As I mentioned earlier, you're going to be really effective in close positions where you can just follow up one harassment right after the next. If you were in a kind of across the map, it would take quite some time for your Thors and Marines to get there, but in these close positions, this can be quite effective, and this can be the case pretty much on any map where you're relatively close to your opponent. This attack can do a lot of damage. I mean, look, not even engaging with the Marines, but he's still going to end up winning, just because it's too much. It's too much for Damaga to handle. It's too much to deal with. And again, just quite frustrating. So, gonna run over that build order really quick. The game is over at this point. There's not a whole lot to Damaga do. Taking a look at the map here, he does have the space coming down over here, but it doesn't really matter. He's gonna lose all of his tech buildings here, and yeah, too much to deal with. So let's run over that build order really quick. Start off with that 10 depot, follow it up with an 11 refinery and 13 barracks, and then at 16 supply, that second refinery. Right after that, getting that orbital command at 16 as well, and then that factory at 16. Now, as soon as the factory starts building, you're going to be putting a reactor on your barrack, and then what's going to happen is once the factory is done, you switch it up so you can start coming out with those Hellions right away. 19 supplies when the Starport started building, and then flying on over that barrack since it has been lifted off from the reactor, landing it down next to the Starport and getting a tech lab. And we did see here RMDX got that tech lab at a 23 supply, and then 28 supplies when you're going to be getting your Banshee, 30 supplies when that Cloak research comes down, and then at 30 supply as well, while you're moving out with those Cloak Banshees, going to be dropping that Armory, and then just start pumping out Thors, put that barrack back on the reactor and start getting those double Marines, and then once you do have about 2 Thors and a nice handful of Marines, push out with a few SCVs for repairing, all the while again doing harassment with those Banshees. And again, this is going to be incredibly difficult for most Zerg players to deal with in close positions. So once again, guys, this has been Force. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and make sure you subscribe to the channel. And as always, guys, keep watching and keep owning.